Al-Biruni was born in a borderland, geographical, cultural, and intellectual. In the late 10th century, in Khwarezm, a region where languages, beliefs, and empires overlapped, he grew up surrounded by difference. That difference would quietly shape the way he thought about the world. Not as something to conquer, but as something to measure, compare, and understand. From an early age, Al-Biruni was less interested in certainty than in accuracy. He did not rush to conclusions. He asked how one could know something, not merely believe it. This attitude would define his entire life's work. Astronomy was his first great discipline. He studied the motion of the stars not as symbols or omens, but as physical realities governed by rules. He observed eclipses, calculated planetary movements, and refined astronomical tables with careful precision. Yet even here, he resisted blind acceptance of earlier authorities. When ancient Greek models conflicted with observation, he trusted the sky more than the book. But astronomy alone was not enough. Al-Biruni understood that to truly comprehend the heavens, one had to understand the earth beneath one's feet. This led him to a field that barely existed as a formal science at the time, geodesy, the measurement of the earth itself. Using geometry, trigonometry, and direct observation, he devised a method to calculate the radius of the earth with remarkable accuracy. He did not travel the globe. He did not rely on inherited estimates. Instead, he climbed a mountain, measured its height, observed the angle of the horizon, and let mathematics do the rest. The result was astonishingly close to modern measurements achieved nearly 1,000 years ago, with no satellites, no telescopes, no global maps. What makes this achievement extraordinary is not just the number itself, but the method. Al-Biruni demonstrated that large truths could be reached through small, careful observations. Precision was not a matter of power, but of patience. Yet his mind did not remain confined to the physical sciences. When political circumstances carried him into the Indian subcontinent, Al-Biruni encountered a civilization profoundly different from his own. Many scholars of his era would have dismissed foreign knowledge as inferior or heretical. Al-Biruni did the opposite. He learned Sanskrit. He read local texts. He spoke with scholars, priests, and mathematicians, not to refute them, but to understand them on their own terms. The result was one of the earliest works of comparative science and anthropology in history. He documented Indian astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, religious practices, and social customs with an objectivity that feels modern even today. He carefully distinguished between observation and interpretation. When he disagreed, he explained why. When he did not understand, he admitted it openly. He refused to caricature another culture simply to affirm his own. This intellectual humility was rare. And it was deliberate. Al-Biruni believed that truth did not belong to any one people. Knowledge, he argued, was universal, but methods were local. To compare sciences fairly, one had to understand the assumptions beneath them. Measurement systems, calendars, cosmologies, all were shaped by geography, history, and language. Ignoring this context, he warned, led to false conclusions. In this sense, Al-Biruni was not merely a scientist. He was a method. Across astronomy, geography, mathematics, mineralogy, and history, his approach remained consistent: observe carefully, measure precisely, compare honestly, and judge cautiously. He wrote not to impress, but to clarify. His works are dense, meticulous, and often devoid of rhetorical flourish, because he believed clarity was a moral responsibility. He lived through political instability, shifting patronage, and periods of isolation. he was not always celebrated in his lifetime. Yet he continued to write, calculate, and translate. Over 100 works are attributed to him, many lost, some surviving as quiet monuments to disciplined thought. Al-Biruni never sought to dominate nature or culture. He sought to understand them. And in doing so, he left behind something more durable than fame, a model of how knowledge itself should be pursued. As Al-Biruni grew older, his work became increasingly unified by a single concern: reliability. He worried less about producing new theories and more about ensuring that existing knowledge rested on firm foundations. In an age when copying authority was common, he insisted on verification. Numbers had to be checked. Sources had to be named. Assumptions had to be exposed. This insistence shaped his approach to time itself. Calendars fascinated him, not as cultural curiosities, but as systems that revealed how civilizations understood nature. He compared solar, lunar, and lunisolar calendars across cultures, noting how astronomy, agriculture, and ritual intertwined. Rather than mocking inconsistencies, he explained them. A calendar, he argued, was not simply a tool, it was a mirror of how a society positioned itself within the cosmos. Measurement was never neutral. The same principle guided his work in mineralogy. He studied the density and properties of metals and stones, carefully weighing substances to determine their specific gravity. His methods anticipated later experimental practices, relying on repeatability rather than speculation. Again and again, he returned to the same quiet discipline: observe, measure, compare. But perhaps his most remarkable contribution lies not in any single field, but in how he connected them. Al-Biruni understood that sciences do not exist in isolation. Astronomy required mathematics. Geography required astronomy. History required chronology. Culture shaped all of them. This interdependence led him to reject simplistic explanations. He warned against transferring conclusions from one context to another without adjustment. What worked in one land, under one sky, might fail elsewhere. This was not relativism. It was rigor. He believed that truth could be approached, but only if one respected complexity. Simplification, when premature, was a form of intellectual dishonesty. In his writings on India, this ethic reached its clearest expression. He explicitly criticized scholars who attacked foreign beliefs without understanding them. Such attacks, he argued, revealed more about the critic's ignorance than the subject's flaws. To describe another system fairly was not a concession, it was a scholarly obligation. He separated description from judgment with surgical care. This approach cost him popularity. Neutrality was often mistaken for sympathy. Precision was confused with indecision. Yet Al-Biruni accepted this isolation. His loyalty was not to factions, but to method. He once wrote that people are enemies of what they do not know. His life's work can be read as a quiet rebuttal to that tendency. Despite the breadth of his scholarship, he avoided grand claims about ultimate truth. He did not attempt to resolve metaphysical questions beyond the reach of observation. Where certainty was impossible, he marked the boundary clearly. This restraint is perhaps his most modern trait. Knowledge, for Al-Biruni, advanced not by bold declarations, but by carefully defined limits. Toward the end of his life, his world narrowed physically even as his intellectual legacy expanded. Political power shifted. Patrons came and went. Yet his writings continued, methodical, patient, unhurried. He worked as though time itself were irrelevant, as though accuracy would eventually find its reader. History proved him right. Centuries later, scholars would rediscover his texts and recognize in them a mind astonishingly ahead of its era. His measurements of the Earth's radius would be confirmed. His comparative methods would resemble modern anthropology. His insistence on verification would echo the principles of the scientific method. Yet he remains relatively unknown outside academic circles. Perhaps because his work lacks drama. There are no heroic myths attached to his name. No single moment of revelation. No dramatic confrontation with authority. Only a lifetime of disciplined thinking. And that, quietly, is the point. Al-Biruni shows us a different model of greatness, one built not on spectacle, but on integrity. He reminds us that understanding the world requires more than intelligence. It requires patience, humility, and the courage to admit uncertainty. In a time when knowledge is often wielded as a weapon or reduced to slogans, his legacy feels unexpectedly urgent. Measure before you judge. Learn before you compare. Observe before you conclude. These were not merely his methods. They were his ethics. And through them, Al-Biruni still speaks, not loudly, but with a clarity that survives centuries.